Nyeren Jadan Jeda Jarve Danyo Jimola Deba Juje Semje Damje Deva Deve Jada Demba Juje Dongarada Dongarje Jada Java Juje Dongarmebe Deva Dam Mundravara Jurje Jere Jada Nida Darve Danyo Jemola Nebar Jurje Semje Damje Deva Dan Deve Jada Dembar Jurje Domara Jada Davara Jurje Domara Mebe Deva Damba Damandravara Jurje Nyere Jada Nida Darve Danyo Jebola Neba Jurje Dada Simje Damje Lojudan Rovara Simje Labda So Yulamda Rovara Simje Labda So Lamdrva Savara Simje Labda So Turba Yeza Javara Simje Labda So Dada Simje Damje Lojudan Rovara Simje Labda So Yulamda Rovara Simje Labda So Lamdrva Savara Simje Labda So Turba Yeza Javara Simje Labda So Dada Simje Damje Lojudan Rovara Simje Labda So Yulamda Rovara Simje Labda So Lamdrva Savara Simje Labda So Yeza Javara Simje Labda So Senda dropa nyambara zinji lo saso gundu soji lama tang reza dropa jimi nipinje kante jamdra di jera kamara dorje yalo zorwande rana zhongzho nije tabjingwe yingti rikwe charkong jamsale kata yinga nange tsela pep rinzen namye gomba nganjo yo 주로 된전 나와 다니는 간사의 교육 참말라 되는데 야 교부자네 자기 때를 해야다 대단해도 나가다냐 심지 담지 된지 되어라 나를 봐야한다고 저거 산지 pardono con compagno con corsate ci da che tare ci siamo c'è da sinne solo un dio niente di con sancho todo tokin simbarchio tenete la can sempre sarà chiuso rombanne tatene che cazzo fa la yang so terci Chokgyur Lingpa che sater Lama Dorje Drakpo Tsal chala Lamrim Nyingpo nan hyoka yori teni ta koni nga so ka Lamrim Nyingpo ta kongo ni mondro ni tango ni songte lamjir ma cha tsama te ta ta so zoba chimbo modo pa ke teni ta nga so yori ta teni teni ta zoba chimbo nyamse le ka so teni kando ke ser 당한테 간도 그 유미 당 양이 토직 규바 간도 저요 그 유미 다 등록고 마셔거들이 되는 지는 거 같은데 지는 토도 보나 심토아 된베 거는 되네 춘데 주불라마 탐지리 사페치 사춘디니라 대바다 이치주 거네 되네 세노 교스
Good morning, my Dharma friends, both those here and those listening online. Please generate bodhicitta as your motivation for listening to the teachings with the thought that all beings throughout space must achieve the state of the primordial Buddha, Samantabhadra, and that it is in order to bring that about that you will listen to and practice the teachings. The teachings with which we are concerned this weekend are our continuing exploration of the exposition of the stages of the path called the Essence of Wisdom, which was taught by Guru Rinpoche and discovered as terma by Chokgyur Lingpa as an accessory to his very secret Guru Sadhana of Dorje Drakpo Tsal. There are, within the central part of this text, there are essentially 5 topics or aspects of the path. And these are the preparation of the soil, which is the path of the sutras, the planting of the seeds, which is the path of empowerment, the nurturing of the seeds, which is the path of the 4 empowerments, which we have just completed. And now we are about to turn to the 4th section, which is the protection of the growing shoots or seeds, which is the dispelling of obstacles. However, Lama said that understand that in the context of Dzogchen, which is the viewpoint from which these teachings come, we don't think of obstacles so much as something we need to dispel, as simply something we need to stamp on or stamp out, you could say. So the dispelling of obstacles, the correction of errors and so on here is largely a matter of the correct mode of conduct. Please listen to these teachings in a relaxed and enthusiastic manner with faith and confidence.
The Terengone as Zoba Chimbo, Sachi Hipi, Sonando, Dale, or Carisina, Zoba Chimbo say at the Mambo, the Hikayo, Machu, Davena, Puzo Chinhavita, and Berozana, Zoba Chimbo, Pekunda, Berozana, Bemala, Tangur, which Kona, Pekunda, Zoba Chimbo, the Messipo Koto, Goyam, Zawani, Mari, Tata, Koto Bokiri, Berozana, Loma Boyoma, Loma Nima, Yoma. Gabolo Jachaka, the reason near La Virani, when you model made it, Zochisa. Zokin Tonkin, Daily model made it. Then it kept on Jinte, so it kept the singer once on Diana, Lama, Yanjana Kumarandani, Hyogasan, Kong Kipoma, Yanjana Kumara, from a Mevano child, it's over Chimba, Jepson Jinte. From a Jimma made it, the Jepson singer once. Then Guru Rinpoche can control Nyingpo this only goes home a jingle to Yoma, go choose the Yin so that you put on the Yoma. Tanga some Barado, Zokintia, Daily, Mamma, and control Nyingpo and do chop. And Yin so that you put on the Tema Dorje Zobachim was a big cut off, Goyam Wakim. Then the Genie going to tell dark Chadana and draw Chimon and was one and also one. Tadana, Zoba Chimbobe, Casacada, Tarcha Chimori. And I challenge the Zoba Chimbon de Gontana and Kayori, Gon Matana and Kayori. Zoba Chimbuchute, now the King Tuson, one Dranake. Giva Sama Giva Jiggling, Masota Giva Jig Tata San Jek, you mean in machine. Jijetan, Yabori Alari, Giva Jiggling, Dindi, Ton San Jet Topson, Alari. They matter Jiva Jig the Nik G, something in the gym go out and reach it to what you could shoot Sabata Jachi or Hit or it. Telling us a Yanisi, the Tiana is he go there, Mato Jek Zangi the Topa Sha, Sarila, Masoke, Sora Chimbo, no more read the not over Chimbo, which the Tawa, let our thought of Kamari. So this are not you may buy your money, so Zangi takes a the Lamsang, the Hako, Tobaki, did all the party, Corner, then so what you could pin on the then the Jawa Dorna, he the Jawa Jackie need Gini, the Pachana, the Jig Sin, Tata Leba, Tangaso Pachazani, Yayo, the Maso Hakori. Natsumaka Hakori, Joran Sanjakan Zogomari, the Lokomoni, Jagomani, Lama Hikigumani. Natso Tata Natso, the Yomo Chiton Cardeno. Chun the so tune the Sena Prona Candeno. Chun the so the Sena Candiki Pinkano. Chora the Candle Lepcano. Then Haju for Chat. Mamma Pacha. Garela Kate heat in a Dolu Royana or Yomo Cher, Chado, Jason Cher. You're just handsome chair, Redo and Zamba Turno Keo. Mama Pacha, Mama Pacha, Arange, Pachangi Bakfo, Saya Pacha, young so long, left calling and so. Take a teaching. Garela Kakaki, he said the part Rondo and a Hakono Madori. Then Mama Pacha, the Sarsi, Zambo. Then the Mazo Tata Montu, the Pacha Zambo, Yago, the Pachangi Bati, Nima region and Pazamazo, the Tadia. Then the Zopachimbo Sapchin, the Tata Mazo, the Lebanon, and Yasna, Kerazo, Nionicas and Nikandova, Chuninicas, say, Jake the Niko, the Debatana, Kasi, you being a Mikite. Nowadays, you get their call, Tata Sajawa Chuniki. The Kerans of young tree, like a Tonga inside a bit, Jake, Mayan, Geja Miki, Kapara, and say, Niko. Tate Jixin, Kimjo, you say about it, Kimjo, so the research on Charan Solo, Halepa, Ripa, Dela, Tata Tsirek, Kimjo, Kimbo, Haja Tasser Chimbo, the Tasser Chimbo. The end of oil in a kaki, men and Aragan that say the gombo, some Ripa Tiku in a kaki, say the Niko, the need to be Pinto Chimbo. Caress in the Tipacha, the Levana Cordo, Lidi Kik, the Tipacha, the Rangin, or Cinco, Nimar Regan, the Pachati, Nimar Regan, the Pachate, Trempatan, Nimatsur, Charana is Hakor. Then also chance of Chatham Hakotoko, and Apacha Zambori, the Nibari. Nga Payari does so, Doari. Nga Pomo Yari does so, Doari. Sama Hakotoko. They don't Pachazangi, the order. Kiwa Mambo Jigo Marit, as a Sangia. Nazo Nambu Chu the Zode, Sangia, some Tonkora, makes us all Sangia, not so Sangia, you Sang to the Yedi or Stepa comes on for the London and Chamgo. That's Sangia the Kiwanin, Sanjo Sambatam, Robert Tonzi, the Kuna, they don't carry Mazon, as on Koran, the government or Nima regular tanky. Nima regular, the Hilla, Tanchir, children, no injecting. Man tenru kan nim hiam ke do do ro do ji tin ke le ka se ya te yobo pa sang de je ju je ta ta sam tang go ro ma ta sam di pa kya de sam bo de le ba de yo ne pi to chin bo de tenru ke sam tang go de ne nge ma yong ko je.
Lama said, I have the feeling today that we are involved in the sharing of the very profound teachings of Dzogchen. And I have this feeling, which is a good feeling for me, because there are so few of you here. It's interesting that even though this teaching is now opened up so that anyone can come, there is a natural self-selection process that occurs. Traditionally, Dzogchen is supposed to be taught to very small groups. It was always extremely restricted that way. In fact, in the early days, it was usually taught to one person or occasionally to 2. The 3 great original teachers of Dzogchen in Tibet were Guru Rinpoche, Vimalamitra, and the Vairochana. Vairochana, as historically significant as he was and is, only had 2 students. And one of them was a man named Pong Nipam Gongho, who was well into his 90s when he met his teacher and began to study. And Vairochana actually adopted or adapted all of the physical postures and so forth to the needs of Pong Nipam Gongpo, who achieved a rainbow body. A little later on, one of the most famous masters in the lineage of Vimalamitra's heart essence was Chitsun Singye Wangchu. And he was the only Dzogchen disciple of Nyak Chonon Kumara. Similarly, Guru Rinpoche taught his heart essence teachings only to one person, Yeshe Gyamtso. He taught other things to others, but the heart essence teachings to her alone. And therefore they are called the heart essence of the Daking, named after her as their sole recipient. Of course, as the centuries went on, Dzogchen became more widely known. And as we see, it is quite widely known now. But it's still unique. It's still very powerful. In fact, even hearing it, Dzogchen teachings, is powerful. Whether you actually practice meditation or not, if you fully receive the Dzogchen teachings, you will, in the worst case scenario, achieve Buddhahood within 3 lifetimes. That's the worst case scenario. If you actually practice these teachings, you will achieve Buddhahood in this life. And most people will achieve it either this life or in 1 or 2 more lives. And this doesn't mean that you are that extraordinary. You shouldn't mistake this to mean that you're not a sentient being. It means that the teachings are that powerful. But we do face difficulty, and our difficulty is our thoughts. Because of the times we live in, our thoughts and our concepts, which are born on our thoughts, or contained in our thoughts, and especially our ideas of good and bad, this is good, this is bad, are very, very strong. We're very, very rigid in our thinking. To practice Dzogchen, we need to recognize this. And we need, ideally, to be able to liberate thoughts of good and bad as soon as they arise. And in any case, not subscribe to them. Habits accrue. Habits ripen, both good and bad habits. The habit of receiving the Dzogchen teachings will ripen, even in the worst case scenario, into Buddhahood in not too long a time. But we also have other habits. And we all know how good or bad our habits really are. We don't require divination. We don't require prophecy. We don't require some kind of recognition. We know in and of ourselves whether we are, so to speak, Lama said, good or bad little girls and little boys. We may be able to fool others. We certainly try to, but we can't really fool ourselves. It's important to remember this simply because as times go on, most people are more unstable, have stronger kleshas than ever before. And ironically, along with our instability and proliferation of kleshas, we are progressively becoming more and more rigid, and more arrogant. So in general, things are getting worse. But in particular, for us as individuals, things may be getting better. There are people who, even if they hear a few words of the teachings, can get them, really get them, and use those few words to achieve liberation. And that is also a function of habit. It's also ripening of good habits. You have an advantage in your culture, which is that you are actually good listeners. You are trained from the early years of your institutionalized education to listen attentively. And that is very helpful. The motivation with which you listen to the teachings, of course, is still in question. Because in your secular education, you're trained to listen in order that you be initially compliant to the institutions to which you are subjected. And then eventually, when you enter what you call higher education, you're made to listen so that you can do research. So it's possible that you pay close attention to the Dzogchen teachings because you're doing research. You may be just researching. It's also equally possible that you are devoted to the one-pointed practice of meditation. Either is equally possible. And I don't know. But if you really listen, and especially if you practice one-pointed meditation, your experience, even in the midst of the habits of this time, will be like the sun bursting forth when the clouds vanish. We need to remember, however, that we are exhausted sentient beings. As fortunate as we are to receive these teachings, as unique an opportunity as this is, we should not delude ourselves into thinking that we are incarnate bodhisattvas who have taken birth intentionally for the benefit of others. We are not. We are exhausted sentient beings, exhausted by the sufferings of samsara. We have a chance to end that, but we should not delude ourselves about who we are now. And thinking this, remembering this, is very helpful.
Oh, so then there is that subject about case or rambala subject number something. This subject number something la that thing he not the same. Tambo de tak zab nani dan the sope call he lower in the nyamni kan the sekuyuna sit na to sama mikite ko de le la wan don da mo just he je ba yan ka ko samari ka sin to ja man do te como yo kama do ta ngo ne ta ne we yin de da wan yin yin de yin la yi lam cho sana sam ke sernes ta nga zo wan ye da yin de yin la ye la so ba da lam de la ram ba de la nga zo la parchi ori parchi ti ka de ser ko de so cha ke cha ba hin ko parchi ser wa la top category so o de hi ko de da yu member se ba wan ye da 당보 왕기 유문 정아서 유문을 세바 야도마니가서 상계 리데 에나 예나야 추와리가 되는 심지리 소화되다 양양양자 맨고로와데 유문을 세바 왕 야다 맨네스 맨산 다 돌고로와 맨산 도르세바라 니저비라 이디즈 깨는 거 보니나서 공자고로와 나서 다도 손들기 제반도서 니르기나 예 람초라 교파 대소 람초도 교파랑 나서 교파 대소 총보 노르기나 페이지 고라다스 총보 노르기나 당나서 잠만 보여 대안하게 나서 자요 파티 망보 남도 파티 망보요 바데 사르치도 게 거베 라타와 인도 스나상 파트 교파 용데스 세 파티 나가 파티 상어 파티 파티라 남바 숨정아 돌레고 대 parti te kanti chongkori sarkodri ezike kori depale tekwa sabte kope simji loja chong tela te kanki komperenchin dan mani pars sangje je sorry komperenchin te ni mani je parta tela parti sa se dona prowan joros pe do tamje troho de la parta ma so tekwa sabte kope kanza la parti sa se de dona troho de chi so tela ke kanki songyang 다 가리서 거리 소야 대다 세베 탑게 럼바 케다지 이제 뻥기결마다 다소 마자 거다 마 가리자 거리스는 가서 공소가 마자고 말해 르빠 공소가 마자고 나서 남도 때라 싫어 르빠 마자고 디마 되게 다뻥 용거를 마도 나서 다당에서 세인 줘봤더니 공소만 보되는 요 맨다 범만 보내고 말해 다 대가대 가워 나서 사죠 그 셈다 동이 그 히럽 지리 센서나 마 같이 요체는 용통 거래 대마 봉도 자고 봉게 결마다 총바 소수 니보 때문에 천는 나다오서
So as I mentioned earlier, the fourth aspect of the path is the removal of obstacles or impediments. And the presentation of this in this text, Lama said, just to give you a heads up, is really easy to understand. It's not going to require much additional explanation beyond what the commentary gives us. And The question remains whether you'll implement it or not, but that's up to you. You should have no difficulty understanding it. And this is presented, as is often the case, in three sections. First, a brief statement, an explanation of that statement, and a conclusion. So the first of these, the brief statement in Guru Rinpoche's original teaching, is: in that way, while engaged in the supreme path of the four branches of approach and accomplishment, the implementation of the four empowerments, this is how to dispel or remove outer, inner, and secret obstacles or impediments. Now, what has been presented so far in this text, which is by far most of it, has been first, after the preparation of the soil of our being through the common path, two processes. The first is the process of ripening. And that here is like the planting of seeds. And this ripening is our receiving the four empowerments. The second process is liberation, the process of actually gradually achieving liberation. And this is the practice of the four paths that correspond to the four empowerments, all of which we've gone through, Lama said, in great detail. And as we saw, both the generation stage alone and the entire path as a whole can be summarized as the four branches of approach and accomplishment. In this case, approach through the generation stage, close approach through the completion stage, accomplishment through the practice of the third empowerment, and great accomplishment through the practice of Dzogchen. And all of you remember these teachings which you received, so there's no need to repeat them. The issue that is addressed in this fourth section of the text, however, is that there is, because you are, in a sense, acquiring something very, very precious by your pursuit of the path, you are subject to attack. Now, Lama said the metaphor here is going to be one of mugging, banditry, and warfare. Those three metaphors kind of combined. But we're obviously not talking about physical warfare or being mugged on the street. Because in this case, the enemy army, the mugger, the bandit, is your own thoughts. So when you're in the process of achieving liberation, you will be attacked by your own issues, let's say. And these arise, as Guru Rinpoche describes them, in three ways: as external or outer impediments, as internal impediments, and as secret impediments. And what these are will be explained. This is an idea that actually we find goes back to the sutras. For example, in the Noble Collection Sutra, it says, small-minded sentient beings who are new to this vehicle, in other words, the Mahayana, in the process, before they have actually grasped or fully acquired this precious jewel, in other words, the liberation of the Mahayana, are enthusiastically attacked by Maras who seek to cause them obstacles. In other words, Maras, whether we think of them as external or internal or both, they don't have to attack ordinary sentient beings. We do it all to ourselves. But when you are in the process of achieving liberation, you become a target for Mara, because you're in the process of escaping from their domain, and they don't like that. So they get excited, they get enthusiastic about messing with you. So the approach here is to arm yourself, to use the metaphor of warfare, to arm yourself and protect yourself against the attacks of Mara, like someone who carrying precious goods, who hires a team of very, very strong bodyguards. Bodyguards who are capable of protecting you from Mara. So this section tells you what bodyguards you need to hire in order to protect the wealth or jewel of your liberation from the attacks of Mara. So.
Oh, so good. What is it? Oh, that Nyingpo de la subject number young Sera the Sion. Jata Jeheba the Sera, Keheba Ni. The Jetela Tonda Karehi or the race and the Jacobs on the Karehi or the race and Tonda part the Jews are Juicy Guns on that I would say Nani Tamki Dimi Drundu Yatos Pangna Nipo so the Rende Jangs Don Tampichani Deri Don Tampichani Jews are the Juicy Yomari Dupa Durang the Kenko Denagi Pangna Niomari so they Jangs Janga de Onja Tambu Legend Loto Jang Serta Lee Sel that the kid of the Lee the Serta Sompian Sonko Tatela Dema Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Thaye Dondam Dimper Rango the part the Cusa that the Cusi cake Kundang Cupeletangi Dimper Matrapa Dimper Trapa Dutlam Mito Durkin Dupa Yen then Rangin to drop a Sero Sitaten Kata Muja Dovachimbo Tick here for capsuling out so the Japsa, the Yadomani Deri, Re Panza Mantova Sota, Lanza, Panlang So Lanza Tumbasota, Panza Mantumba Sota, Labza Tumbaso, but they Nikan out some Trundogoro, Jek Pa Fangoya, the Jek Lingoya, the Sota, things that Nyingpo so gun the rate and their jangs, then you got in their body. Yomari, Nika Yomari, Dondambachani Yomari. Yanja, Gunzukwang, not so Dimba needed to the Natson Rogoro. Lon Tora Yerta Jepa, Gunzubjit Dimba, Londe, Nasam Buter, Dondamjit Dimba, some Jangos and Mohasa Sonro. But the Dimba needed Namyang on Rogo. Carriage of Korika Yopa Cage and a Korika Meva Cage and a Carrisina, that ri 동담지 찬이 매화된 가서 하고 자료 건설 찬이 가서 람 장사 요바디 희거로 내가 좀 트렌드 디 요바된 가서 캐링 거로 받아라 리스펙트 거로 받아 서포트 티 거로 받아 가서 거로 뭐네 거로 캐링 거로 되다 되니 대 가래 거리 다 됐게다 희인 거 건설 뎀바라 템베 람효 담보 레지지도 가서 레 담보 받아 뭐네 리다 가서 너나 사키를 값은 남들 여름 것 값서 다 좋게 값서 가르치나 단 돌나 가서 람나니 초절지 람는 가서 초남간 내 생각 유나 미나 많게 그리도 원래 되니 내가 이게 람 레티 레 담보베 레티 로이 건도 또베 총거리 용물이도 건도가 총거리 용 가서 건도 또바 총거리 용 안데 메도데 야본도 지본도 야본문도 지본문도 나란데 야나 야간도 야나 야간도 상는 나한테 로 망고게 처럼 그도 대 장고데 저 용물이도 탐다다 템버 사오 손다 타키히 막
네, 저희's 제 루스 말이라. 네, 이노도 동보 레chen 나도 정말 케이스는 동보 레chen 나도 정말 레
되게 치도 이게
이gnore
되게 치 라이마 되게 노노 대 노라 리 되게 많이
케이만 영케는 저거 not okay. So this now we come to the second part, which is who the bodyguards are and how to hire them. To use the analogy. And it would be reasonable for this second part just to have one part, but so it doesn't. It has two parts. But there is a reason why it has two parts, as you'll see. And the first part is a general idea. In other words, without specifying different sorts of obstacles or impediments, how to deal with impediments in general. And then the second part gets into the specifics of what are the problems, what are the impediments that were previously referred to as outer, inner, and secret. So first of all, in Guru Rinpoche's root text, he says, really, there are no obstacles. There is nothing that could be obstructed. And there is no such thing as obstruction. Because everything, all of those things, are unreal. They are like a snake untying its own knots. So in reality, things are way beyond anything to be abandoned, anything or gotten rid of, anything to be introduced or added, and way beyond any notion of some kind of remedy or trying to fix anything. However, that's what is true. However, as beginners, we have thoughts. And so we need to purify our thinking. In other words, in general, there are no obstacles, but we think there are. And so the removal of obstacles consists of removing the thought that there are obstacles. Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Thaye says, realistically, as beginners, we need to keep two things in mind at the same time. Absolute truth, which is how things are, or things as they are, and relative truth, which is how things appear to us. Of course, absolute truth is the absolute truth of those things that appear to us as they appear to us. And their appearance is not absolute, it's subjective, it's relative. But nevertheless, we need to keep both in mind as though they are separate things. So first of all, there's no such thing as absolute truth and relative truth as two different things. But because we are deluded and believe there is, we need to keep them both in mind. In absolute truth, in reality, there is nothing that could possibly be impeded. If we talk about impediments or obstacles, there has to be something to be impeded. Well, there isn't. There isn't anything that could possibly be impeded by anything. There is therefore nothing anywhere which could possibly impede. There is therefore no such thing as an impediment. So everything that we identify as an impediment, an obstruction, an obstacle, or an obstructor, an agent of obstruction, has no reality as such. All such identifications are merely our projections, our labels. There is not so much as an atom, Jamgon Lodro Thaye says, an atom of obstructor or obstructee anywhere. There never has been, there couldn't be. Well, what is this appearance? Because we have these words, right? Impeded, obstruction, obstacles, and so on. So what is this appearance? It's like the knots a snake ties itself in. Snakes, in coiling and doing their snake thing, can tie themselves into knots. But nobody needs to come along and help the snake out. You don't have to, we don't have people whose job it is to untie snakes. The knot is something that we see. When we look at the snake, we think that snake has tied itself into knots, I better help it out. The snake doesn't think that. The snake is fine. That's just what snakes do. And as it moves from one position to another, the knots come untied because they're what we would call slip knots. So in that sense, everything that we think of as a knot, an obstacle, is really a slip knot, or in the traditional term, a snake knot. Therefore, really, there is nothing to be gotten rid of. And we can prove this very simply. If there were anything to be gotten rid of, we couldn't get rid of it. if anything to be gotten rid of truly existed, we couldn't do anything about it. So therefore, there cannot be and is not. Similarly, there is nothing that we need to add or seek outside ourselves. Because if there were, we couldn't add it. You couldn't add something from outside your mind to your mind. So therefore, there is nothing to be removed, and there is nothing to be added in reality. So therefore, our situation, as Guru Rinpoche said, is way beyond the need for any kind of remedy. If we needed a remedy, there couldn't be a remedy that would work. However, while that is what is true, while that is the way things work, it is not how we think. And how we think colors our experience. So therefore, because we think that there are things to be gotten rid of, we have to get rid of it. Because we think there are things we need to add, we need to add them. And because we think we have problems that require solutions, we need to find the solutions. The reason for this, Lama said, is that we're very, very early on in the path. Whether we look at it from the standpoint of the 4 yogas of Mahamudra or the 4 appearances of Dzogchen, we are at the beginning of the path of accumulation, the first of the paths. We are attempting to grab hold of the very, very beginning of the path of accumulation. So in fact, we're basically trying to start the path. We're still trying to get started. Which means that we are still largely immersed in our own delusion. And the delusion consists of our ideas about reality, all of which are wrong. But until we experience that they are wrong, we will continue to believe them. And as long as we continue to believe them, we will need to act as though they're not wrong. So because we will continue to believe we have problems or obstacles until it is proven to us that we don't, we will need to solve our problems and remove our obstacles. So therefore, although ultimately there is no need for it, relatively, there is a great need for the removal of obstacles.
That's what they did. I'm going to Sanjay song you but take company song you what they song, kind of song you mean that's a summer he called. Then the tarpe tapping, Taparanda, he purchased, and the tapping called it. I'm so tapping. Mengas and not Terry Lama Tamjik Mengas and not tapping called it. To the same Charans and also someone to the young Jondo, young Codri, the Gerdas Hangeke, Sapa the Jachewa, Mambo song. Jachewa Mambo song, Sapa the Jachewa. Dinan is Sapa, Chu Menga Corte, not so Lama Tatama, Dinko, and Zabalam. then the so chu da lama de yi chi ya bo si de ne di song ya de mo ne ni ma re ya de che tu ni da sam da ka ma kyo da kyo na la yi chi je go ni nya ne si ga na ni ma re ya da ya je chu chen mo ro jo ni ma re ya de ma ze na nga gi yin gi lo ka na wa re ga ya o ma re ka chi lo na ho lo jo nga re da lo abcd ri sa ne abcd ri che ko da de go de jo re de ma do yin cho ma re then the Sijana, Tindi Jacha Jack, the Sage or in Jamgon Lodro Thaye, Guru Rinpoche, he Magovari Sanji Muri, so Sanji, the Dorje Sonri, Jamgon Lodro Thaye, Guru Rinpoche, Muri, Guru Rinpoche, Musu, Kakalamas one. They cannot Zala or Marin Jackie Jawa. The Minga de Nasokas, Nimari Gentala, Tata, Konamba Soran, them don't say the Gombidina. Jaja Jagan Yamari and the Pondo, Chokchimbo, Yaki, Chokchimbo, Yongjo, Delatin, Yichiri, Delatin, then Toza Yonso about the top, Taza Yonso about the Tanako. They magic Gorda, some of the Chula Gangar Song Yata, Chula Gangar Song, the Degree Dai, Song, Chula Gangar Song Yata, Nimandu, the Katsi Gomna, Che, Tamatoma, the Sangasang and the Ridana, that he got the one in my he already. And I take up the Dequa Jango, the Yja, Sago, the Dip Jango, the Sapugo, the Mendram Borgo, the Sony Sago, so Sago, Dinani, Mikisonam, so Sago, the Kantata Sago, the Chipa Yomari, Kantata Jogandogo Jago, the Chupan Borgo, the Meto Kangin Bertanam Borgo, the Chipimari, Jojan Ronri, Mejan Ronri, Ujan Kondros Akama, Sanyang, Shanyam Kondros Akama, Lan, Roger, Tan, Lopon, the John Roger. Chawamari, Devin Aran, Musu Yuti, Sonam Gets Sadagina, Delatina, the Tanako, the Delatina, Yishing and the Jonko. So that three call some tangori, the one is on the tango. We don't
know. In this regard, we need to remember what something the Buddha said. Toward the end of his life, I have shown you the method of achieving freedom, but it's up to you to achieve it. The key word in this statement by the Buddha is this word method or means. Everything the Buddha taught, as vast and profound as it is method. It's all technique, a technique for achieving freedom. And methods need to be learned and then put into practice, implemented. Learning a method and not practicing it is really just the acquisition of information that is never used. At the same time, as this section of the text will discuss, we find practice difficult. Traditionally, it is said that the degree to which we find practice difficult, and there are all different sorts of ways we can experience that difficulty, which we call outer, inner, and secret obstacles, and so on, as you see. But the different ways that we find practice difficult are signs that we require purification. It's not bad news. If you find it hard to clean something, it means you need to clean it. If it's easy to clean, it means it's not that dirty to begin with. So we don't have to regard this as bad news. But if we find practice inconvenient, irritating, tiring, boring, any of these things, this means that we require purification. And along with purification, we need to strengthen ourselves through the accumulation of merit, whether it's offering anything we can make offerings, Lama said the mandala offering, offering flowers, offering whatever is in accordance with your means, and so on. But these things will actually help. And the sign that we need to engage in these means, he said, is that we find practice difficult.
Oh, so good. Nyingpo se rode hieba de la sana sang bi case of tan here got it. Say Yoma Lucha case of tang. Tang so that Yonko Naga party Nang party Lucha case of tang. Somewhat thing in the same case of tang. Tomong Yam the ginger case was, but then number year here. De la tambo sen yongwa lucha ke servanes de la tako zav tsek na ni yongwa lu chok ni ke serene kun ye ba kha dan zen ye sa nam to gi lan yep ja za yin ni tham ji dong a te ya rang ge sem simni tu dar gin ba rang wa chang re do contract gi la gangar bors ta te ta Redo contract seats on his own day, Nasa Jakari, Pachi Jakari, Donga Yonkari, Medewa Yonkari, Sena Nasa Yonkari, Sama Yonkari, Payoko Gado Redo Kayamasi, Payoko also Gangar Po, Honge, do the taker, Songo Yong, Luno Saki Kipana the Babs, Tateman, Dravanane, Saboki and Dota, and the Ki, Tanejama, Dote. Ji song de, Yongwa Yellow Trip. Lulas, Yonga Koma, Yonde, Chopa the song with Neregnam, Ye Cake Server Top, Namjet Top, Yapakana, Super Gunja Tento, Toxum Bala Nyara La, Datans and Benyava Linam, Joyless Sape, Nyomon Gun, Dam Nam Dogas on with Jin said this, so that is okay. Javana, Sarpondo, Delandraki, Yang Tarcha Gohamadon, also the Pacharka Hako, that the Sakare you meet, Jin Country Yonko you meet, that the Sahako, Jeva, that tea, Jin Dela, Jeva, Tosom number, Java, some Conta Don, Yiman, Mele, Yondrop, say, Tanam Charkini, Conta, Yiman, Yondrop, Tanam. Never give your target, tell it in a day, Jari sent to give your target, the focus or banana or the Kantaya, that tailor in a sort of Yoma, Tambo doing Yoma yellow, drop the already, Yoma yet, come a dance at it, Yoma yet, come a donkey, Namdo has over your already, Nam your monk home already, then only Yoma yet from the already, no see the Tateri already, that they. There, Yere Jata Kid, Dambi Yipja Zabia, the Mene, Lucemla Sung, Sorbe Yong, Doatamji, Cuba Tap Tamartar, Moto, Mimki, La Retu Machawaras, that the Pula Lako, the Rita. Not so America de Cable Yomari, Moto, they say, Ateko Lena, now the Chandromari, Choran, not the Donic that they get Tori, Pisa, Zena. Why Lamri, Paja, now and Rokamari, the Poo in that the motor to Juzi, the Namdo Charge Namdo Juzi, the Taki Yakudo, the other day, that they go Marizo, that day. Zoba Jimon Namjoba, they go Marizo, don't get us of Trabio Mari, Nazangus of Trabio Mari, de la Pa Jin, this Jin, the server top de la, Mesa Lama Dingoma, Trava Dingoma, Napa Dingomari, Mimba Dingo Mari, Choraga Nasa, Choraga Passer, the set of careers on it. Zopa Chela Zata Karma me, Zopa Chela Tokyo me. So that Zoki Tawaya, Gandro, the Hino Gorova, the Dembari, Nasa Gomari, Tokyo, To Jaja, Chamik and the Mambo. do so the toy temper the chamira si to gang the Galova Jabya, Maro Dorje Mambo, Tomambo, Tata Lama Ganala Koni Topgyal salary. Why not certain character the Richona Kama Magona, then I didn't answer go Mari, and Dina, that's a Nasata, Jo Mari, Tramota, Jo Mari, Young Sao Mari. Carry is in Yosa Major, the Dreva Kejar Kigan. And you, they were going Sao Karena. Doba Jet and Lauren Doba Jet and as a good old Jarawa. Doba Concrete, sorry, don't point Romate, to Concrete and Doba Gallery. Doba Gallery, to Curson, the Doba Pozo, Chok Tramon, the Nepogate. Doba Gallery, Doba the curse, hello Curson, Jalachiku, Doba Nana Condo Aya. Lama so Namdola, Cariseke, Doba Yagonsa, Sorka, Jozo, Uncle Namdo Chimori. Naga Doban Posa Nima, the Doban Posa Chancellor. Chancellor Nomobility and Namdola in the Doban Poco, the King Long the Corva. Doban Posa, the Chancellor, the Mato, Gomba Delapai and Pingo, Madomato, Ying at Doban Pogus and Jima did an Akarianos. Dobaka. That's Turkey. Cope Namjabari. Dina get Charter. Machawa, Danzake. Choa Ji Jansi, Ma, Seria and Choa Da, Seria and Choa Ji Tadi, then you can't go home. Nata Omarida, Choni Yomar, Danze Cakes at the Nata Lachi Omar. Yoan Tong Yama, Danze Cakes. Yoan Tong Yumisa, Nata Yomari. Danze Choa Ji Jan, Redog and Transar Goodies, Rewata Topa. Yapor Yoni Rewa, Nimbara Mayon Topa, then good day, need yours. Do chalk long keep go the long keep so donga lesson. Donga bought the rank central Ranzale Guna meeting, rank central Ranzala Tonga say at the Yomo Tonga. Rank central by the king on Korwa, Tanga to Madewa Yonkador, Yomo Magindar to Topgyal Lape, Topgyal, the king Machone, Nimama the same one ring on who's over there, then Dogo, the Terry. Dancing good meeting, semi done Jega, Nam Chi, Juba the travel in Chine, dancing Luton. Dadan Zambako Luton. Ninzing the Redochu. The so some the Jews say, Kibzik Jew Majilla Gonga, so Majilla Gompe, Kibzik Jew like Kitchen Borwa, Jew the Zokiri, Ninzing Redochi, Jotinchi, Ni. 这几辈这个更大，你让引进个朋友，你这热到个叫邻居进你，邻居当不马上的邻居几辈，拿啥的干的这么多是这几了，邻居就拿啥的，但这个的更大个你让引的话，很多哈的，结果就啦，就不他就不他硬了要把那，是把可能个我了，教。 나자 손나 손게 나나나데 나베가 나자 징에 연바고 나게 저나 나게 차게 혀야 혀초야리 나서 참아 혀거리 혀나 혀 나나 나 등주변도 더거리 네 혀바데 내조다 데 다도 빵리 메버 성조 렉동 진바랑고 제제도 장베 제제도 장베 요마르고 이히 지경 Yomarpe Yiki, Jom, Jin Yomo Yenso, Lo, Jin Yomo Batam, Pa Yensa, Samjor Nambo, Modobar, Tambar, Yola, Yolas, Dedi. Then Drain, Ronyom Savanes, Dring, Ronyom, Drengota, Rab, Drain, Tasum, Drain, Rabrina, Tata Gori, Drain, Ronyom Gatawa, Kanga Topa, Machunan, Manava, Rewata, Nava Topa, Country Zini, Gila. Nava Revata, Nava Topa, Patrick Zin, Gila, Lun Nana, Danzay the Kieva, Timmy, Kangar, Lenki, Porsi, Pakangar, Lenki, Tatawa Kandra and Sal, Zobachi Tawa, the country Osari, Zobachi Namjava said the country Osari, not Debaki and the Rida. The look of Zokin Namjava, Mambo Yorin as a pool. Konazo, Judo Mari, Radanori, Kala Yujanori, Mejanori, Najanori, Sajanori. That Mambori, Upa Mambori, the Pomo Mambori. That they money when the country window. That the Mate country more power. Moneta, the country Yamatin, so Hakota, to me Kanga Linki, Pola, Tija Masenda, Tamar Mikpe Jonas, that they get Sermatam. Tamar Mikbak John, down Mikbanda, take Tapkin the sea, Lando Gong Han, the Danghaka, Honka, Janda, Long Sem, Treve, Nikan, Kangin, Zebra make this. Honka, Jadanga, the home, the home of Samnatone, Nika, Tamki, Pajik the turn, the Hongi, Samnatok, Zebra, Mikba Tito, Yabarhone, Hong Hongyek number, Dula, Taker, Kilula. Songo Honga number, Songo Kang, can go Nana, go May, Nana, May, Lopo Kare, Nana, Honga number, Sir, Honga number Pa, Jungne, Nakians, the young bed, Tarimbo Nakians of Pass, Thompson, something that Jeremy, Tama, Tama, Tatawa, half, go, Matam, Tama, young Tarimbo, Yawa, Mula, Longma, Longoma, Son, Yang, Sir Yang Son. Nasa set of curry. Yang Sarki Hibalan, now Yamban Zata, Nado, Sabin Zata, Mo, Rangi, Dimi Rangi, Delok, not the upper Saos, Rangi, Devatela, not the one relaxing, Zudukola, Nasa Tanto. Say King, Young Yuki, say King, Lopola, Nasa, Tamki Satan Quarter.
The second part of this is has 4 parts. These correspond to the outer, inner, and secret types of obstacle. So this will be, as indicated, a specific description of what the obstacles are and how to overcome them. The first is how to dispel the outer obstacle of the elements affecting your body. Second is how to dispel the inner impediment of maras. The third is how to dispel the secret impediment, which is mental impediments to samadhi, or meditative absorption. And the fourth is how to dispel that condition or impediment that is kind of a little bit of all three, that comes from what is called experience contagion, and that will be explained later on when we get to it, if we get to it. So the first of these is how to dispel. So understand that what is being spoken of here in large part is Tibetan medicine in the first part. So it's going to go through the classifications of Tibetan medical diagnosis. And this is not a statement by the management or institution of KPL saying you should not go to the doctor. We are not saying that you should not go to the doctor. He's saying what Lama is saying is that if, well, you'll see when we get to it what he is saying.
Mazo tawa te to na taso sa chuchi lek to wuna den rakari mato jege kepe ke larje tong rogo ma nyamni te sisi to tendru kya kureo marida.
Yeah, you'll see.
Tatange kongi lapa yamba keranzo kare yamba di keranzo ha kori lo yamba te.
You'll see when we get to it that it's describing. Well, you'll see, and then it will be he restated it several times during the thing. But I just want to make sure. because it all comes back to me and I hear about it. So the first type, in other words, the first type of impediment being talked about here, what's called an external impediment, is physical sickness, being physically sick. And the presentation here involves an analysis of the original causes, present conditions of sickness, as well as the nature of their result, which is the experience of sickness. So first of all, in Guru Rinpoche's text, the first type of impediment that we seek to remove is physical sickness, which is defined here as when the elements or constituents within our bodies, Guru Rinpoche says, are disturbed. In other words, they're not working right. They're not functioning properly. They're a lot of times you get translated as imbalance, but it actually means out of disordered. Disordered. However, we need to look at, to understand this, we need to look at what really causes sickness. And the reason for this, Lama said, is that if you understand the original cause of sickness, then if you have really grasped the view, you can actually resolve sickness by dealing with its fundamental causes. The cause of sickness is the accumulation of habits by or in the all basis consciousness. I hope you all remember what the all basis consciousness is. So in your individual, I have to go very slowly. So the all basis consciousness is when your mind mistakes itself. When your mind, let's keep it simple. When your mind is ignorant, your mind forms what we call the all basis consciousness. Now I'm going to take this very, very slowly because, our memories are not what they might be. This is not the same, repeat, not the same as the original basis or the pure basis. Okay, so don't mix those two up. That's a common error, not just among new people, but so the all basis consciousness is what arises when a mind fails to recognize itself. That makes the mind sticky, like flypaper, let's say. And what sticks to it is habit. In other words, if your mind is in a state of self-recognition, it's not sticky. You're not going to accumulate habit. You don't hold on to things. But as soon as there's ignorance, your mind becomes sticky. And stuff gets stuck to it. And in fact, the word for habit means a little stuck. And is also connected to the word for attachment. Attachment, stuck, sticky, they're all related. So your mind becomes sticky because it's ignorant. And therefore, as we go on, we accumulate more and more habits. The worst of these habits, and the most fundamental of them, is fixation on a self. Now, fixation on a self is a second level of ignorance. The fundamental level is simply not knowing, not seeing ourselves. The mind not seeing itself. When it goes further and mistakes itself to be something it is not, that forms another layer of afflicted consciousness, which is called the seventh consciousness, or the mentally afflicted consciousness. I know this is a lot to entertain, but you need to understand these things to follow Guru Rinpoche's explanation of why we get sick. That seventh consciousness, which is the mind mistaking itself to be a self. The eighth consciousness is simply the absence of recognition, but it's passive. The seventh consciousness is active misapprehension. So they're called connate ignorance, co-emergent ignorance, and a labeling ignorance. That further level of, we could say, stickiness is what causes thought. That's why we think. Now, we think that thinking is natural. Thinking is not natural. Thinking is messed up. So therefore, you can tell, as long as you still think, you're still messed up. It's very easy. So the seventh consciousness produces the sixth, which is the thinking mind. That thinking mind, thought, is the proximate cause of sickness. So, to sum up what's gone before, there's a lot more coming. Because your mind doesn't recognize itself, because it therefore misapprehends itself, and because it therefore thinks, thinking that the only way to be aware is to think, you get sick. That's the cause of sickness. And that's why Lama said, this understanding is very powerful if you grasp the view, because you can uproot sickness at its cause. But that's why I cautioned, don't misunderstand this to saying, cancel your health insurance or anything.
Poor insurance
Now,
companies.
because of that, and this is key to the understanding of the sacred medicine that was taught by the medicine Buddha in the four medicinal tantras, that is the basis for Tibetan medicine. Because of that, we think of, and we'll go through what they are, sickness as being of 404 different types. And people misunderstand this to say, oh, Tibetans say there are only 404 illnesses. We know there are more than that. It's not the same thing.
How much do you have told that more you can?
There are 404 processes that cause sickness. Okay, and we'll go through what they are. And I have to go through this slowly because my experience has taught me that when people come back to me with what they think Lama said, it's often not exactly what he said. So I want to be careful. Because we think, we give rise to the emotions that we call the five poisons. In other words, five problematic emotional states. And they make us sick. So we're getting closer to the actual immediate condition. So all of this starts with your mind not recognizing itself. If your mind replaces that non-recognition with recognition, there is no longer a sticky all-basis consciousness. It is transformed into all-basis wisdom. Therefore, nothing can stick to it. There is therefore no longer an afflicted mental consciousness that mistakes the eighth consciousness to be itself. There is therefore no longer the thinking mental consciousness. There will therefore no longer be the five poisons. You will therefore no longer get sick. So the ultimate solution to the problem of sickness, Guru Rinpoche says, is sustain recognition of your mind itself. Naked, which means non-conceptual, without barriers, and simple, without any kind of ideas or concepts. Let hope and fear, doubt and anxiety go. Just let go of them. Let them go wherever they want. They can't actually go anywhere, but so to speak, he says, just let them go. Let them do what they want. And finally, he says, collect the sickness into whom and expel the pain directly. Expel it with the stale breath and let your mind relax naturally. So that's the root text, and now Jamgon Lodro Thaye is going to explain it. And then Lama had some comments about that. And I'll try and head off any potential difficulties. So, our bodies are composed, Jamgon Lodro Thaye says, of the four elements. And before you close your minds, let me explain what the four elements really are. I know you're going to say, oh yeah, that's primitive medieval thinking, earth, fire, air, and water. We're smarter than that, aren't we? You have solidity, you have flesh, you have fluids, you have blood, you have a temperature, hopefully, and you breathe, you need air to live, and you occupy space. That's all it's saying. It's not, we're not trying to refute. Nothing is intended here to refute science. But because we have these bodies that interact with the external environment and are dependent upon the external environment, they are fragile and subject to the vicissitudes of our environment. In other words, from looking at it from from an immediate physical point of view, our bodies are capable of falling out of balance, getting out of whack. And our bodies, because they're not independent, because they're affected by everything with which they interact, are easily disordered. So that's what most people think of as the cause of sickness. And Guru Rinpoche and Jamgon Lodro Thaye are not saying that that isn't because of sickness. Yeah, we get sick because our bodies get out of whack. That's the immediate condition. But why? To understand the solution, the final remedy here, we need to ask, why? Why? To understand why, we need to go back to the beginning. Because our minds fail to recognize themselves, they become ignorant, and therefore they are ignorant. By definition, that is ignorance. And therefore, they are sticky. They accumulate habits, diverse habits. And among the habits that we accumulate, the habits that that actually cause sickness are the habits of or reactivity, attachment, aversion, and apathy. These are the three ways that we can react in a messed up way to things. Now, of course, that reactivity is itself a symptom of the original cause, which is the ignorant mind mistaking itself to be a self with the attributes of a self. But because we mistake our minds to be a self, we accumulate, as we saw, the imprints of actions. Our minds are sticky. We accumulate karma. And the karma that we accumulate through those three poisons causes an ever-increasing aggregation of thoughts. And those thoughts become the incipient condition for getting sick. The result of those thoughts is that in our embodied state, we have the physical ripening, because our bodies are the results of the fully ripened results of past actions, among the four results of every action. So therefore, our bodies contain within them the fully ripened result of actions of the three, motivated by the three poisons, in the form of proximate causes of sickness. So to summarize this, our bodies have the tendency to get sick because we did bad things in previous lives, to put it in words of one syllable. And dige konta dun shenmong manle yongrup de shizen yora de ne shija tsashi rerela de jari yora de shide de konta shenmong yongrup Charjichin. Okay. So all of that is happening Basically, we have the fundamental origin of sickness is ignorance, and then which causes the kleshas, which causes us to accumulate negative karma, and those negative actions ripen as the tendency to get sick in particular ways in this life. The results of these are the 404 types of illness. And the classification of 404 is that there are 101 of each of 4 ways to get sick. So it's not specific ailments, it's ways to get sick. And the 4 ways are imaginary, dependent, real, and circumstantial. So I have to explain these terms because you're not used to them. The imaginary, dependent, and real are 3 important terms in Buddhist philosophy that some of you will remember from the beginning of this teaching years ago, but in case you don't, I have to explain them. The easiest way to understand the 3 natures is, all right. I used the example that Kimball Sutram used to use. So I open a closet in a dark room, and there is a coiled rope that has had paint spilled on it, so it's spotted. Because the room is dark, and because I'm afraid of snakes, I think it's a snake. So the situation involves my thought, snake, and the coiled rope and the darkness. The snake is imaginary. There is no snake there. The thought snake is dependent. It's dependent on the conditions. What are the conditions? My fear of snakes, the darkness in the room, my having opened the closet door, paint having spilled on the rope being coiled the way a snake coils. So you have to understand the difference between imaginary and dependent. The thought of the snake is dependent. The snake is imaginary, it doesn't exist. The spotted rope is real. That's what's there. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you got that, because we've got to go on. So sickness can be imaginary, dependent, or real. And then Lama said the 4th category is circumstantial, which is a separate thing. In other words, caused by immediate circumstances. So each of those can have 101 varieties. So in short, the final result one final result of our ignorance is that it ripens through these various processes, and we feel physically bad. And what Jamgon Lodro Thaye refers to here as feeling physically bad, Sungun Soba, covers both pain and sickness. So in other words, nausea, if you think that's not pain, is still bad. So Zungu includes that. So this means, and this is important because this is a distinction between sickness and symptoms. So you have the original cause of ignorance, you have it ripening karmically as sickness, and then you have the symptoms of the sickness. So put a bookmark in that. Ordinarily, what do? We seek relief. And Lama said the next list of ways in which you try to seek relief is characteristically Tibetan. And then that led off on a segue, which we'll get into. Ordinarily, you go, you seek divination. You go to a Lama or somebody else you believe skilled in divination, and you get a divination. And the divination will tell you, you're sick because of this, you have to sponsor such and such ceremony. And then you have a ceremony, you sponsor a ceremony. And, or you go to a doctor and you seek a diagnosis and a treatment. Now, the first of these, seeking divination and a remedy through a ceremony, is, as Lama said, specifically Tibetan. People don't do that here, as he said. But the other, we do. We go to a doctor and we seek diagnosis and treatment. So the point is the same. So don't come back and say to me, I'm sorry, I'm speaking from experience, you know, what about divination and so on and so forth. The point here is, if you have gained certainty in the view, you don't have to restrict yourself to physical means of treatment. This is not saying don't take your medicine, but you are free, you have a freedom that makes you less dependent on that. And this is because you recognize that the original cause of all illness is fixation on a self. Now, Lama said this very much echoes the teachings in Machik Labdrun's Severance. In fact, it's identical to them in many respects. As she points out in her teachings on severance, if you can cut through fixation on a self, you cut through everything all at once. And he commented on this. He said, therefore, severance and Dzogchen are synonymous. We can distinguish between lineages and traditions, but the point is the same. If you cut through self-fixation, you cut through everything all at once. Cut through the original cause of all obstacles, including sickness. So the best way is, aside from whatever medical remedy you may be employing, is to destroy all hope and fear. At the same time, sort of in between that and the proximate remedy of medicine, recognize that your particular style of sickness comes originally from your particular style of klesha. There are illnesses that are caused by desire, illnesses that are caused by anger, illnesses that are caused by pride, illnesses that are caused by jealousy, and illnesses that are caused by willful stupidity. So recognize that if you're sick, it's the ripening of your past kleshas, and the habit of those kleshas is still with you. But that your mind itself can't get sick. mind, anyone's mind, the mind itself, has never come into being and can never pass out of being. Therefore, you can't even speak of it remaining. You can't say your mind remains. You can talk about something remaining if it starts at a certain point and ends at a certain point. My mind existed from 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then you could say my mind remained for 3 hours. But if it's always been there and will always be there, you're describing something that doesn't exist because there's no other possibility. A concept by nature is an isolate. And if there's no state to be isolated from that, no possible state to be isolated from that, the concept has no meaning. So your mind was never born. So as much as we suffer through human birth, we were never really born. Your mind, therefore, does not age. It can't get sick, and it certainly can't die. So if you know that, then, Lama said, as Machik Lodro taught, let go of fixation on the self. Because the self doesn't exist. And if you cut through fixation on a self, you will simultaneously cut through all dualism. Because dualism starts with the concept, the idea of self, and therefore self and other. If you cut through all dualism, you not only cut through the dualism of self and other, you cut through all dualities, all comparative designations, because they're all imaginary. So if you cut through fixation on a self, you necessarily cut through hope and fear. Which means as long as you still have hope and fear, you have not eradicated fixation on the self. Now, the value of this is obvious. If you cut through hope and fear, aside from whatever is going on medically, you have cut through 99% of your misery, even in short terms. So, by resolving that the original cause of sickness is what Jamgon Lodro Thaye here calls the sickness of co-emergence, the sickness, the disease of ignorance, then you cure, ultimately, in the long run, all resultant imaginary ailments. And finally, ultimately, we would have to say that all of our physical experience, including sickness, is imaginary. Because as we saw at the beginning, none of it is real. So, in short, if you cut through self-fixation, you cut through everything. And then, it doesn't matter whether you seek medical treatment or not. Because you will have no pain as we know it. You can't feel, he uses the term nizuk, so the agony of sickness, the pain of sickness, which includes, as I said, other unpleasant things. You can't feel unpleasantness. You can't feel something as unpleasant without the thought of the self. So if the thought of the self is eradicated, then without having to get rid of or introduce anything to your experience, it all stops. And in that state, so that is the best way, Jamgon Lodro Thaye says. The best way to cure an illness is to simply let go. Let go of fixation on the self. And that, if you really let go, will cut through all thoughts of a self and therefore everything else. And you'll be left in a one-pointed state of naked awareness emptiness, or empty awareness. So in that case, what's happening is that the cause of sickness, ignorance, is destroyed by wisdom, or wisdom awareness. The condition for sickness, which is the kleshas, those conditions just vanish into space, because you can't have kleshas without self-fixation. And the proximate circumstance of suffering, which is a thought, your thoughts will dissolve, because you can't have thoughts without kleshas, just as you can't have kleshas without ignorance. So that's the best way. And then he gives a second best way, an intermediate way. And that is the cultivation of equal flavor, or equal taste. If you don't have the realization just described, then let go of the hope of getting well. The hope that one day you won't be sick. And the fear of continuing to be sick. If you cut through that, it's funny, it's anxiety, but it's a kind of, it means, we could say pernicious anxiety, or a kind of lurking anxiety. If you cut through that lurking anxiety, then you can just, you'll be able to let go, to relax, and let the appearance of your body, however it appears, sick or not sick, and your prior fixation on the self, you'll just be able to let go of them, because you won't have a feeling of ownership and protection. So to make means you'll be independent of them. You won't feel the need, you won't feel that you own your body and your self, and therefore you won't feel that you have to protect them, and you'll be able to let go. So that's the intermediate way. If you don't have the realization where you can just let go, then this is the intermediate way, through cultivating equal flavor. And then there's the way for lesser practitioners. And this is, now ultimately, although they're called, best, intermediate, and lesser, there are three different ways of doing the same thing. So they're not really lesser. But the lesser one here is using your imagination. And you're going to use the sound and image of the syllable hum for this. The sound, you mix the sound of hum with your breath and your mind, and you could say your energy. So you mix all of that together, and then you simply imagine a hum. So you have the visual image also, a hum wherever you're sick. So whatever part of your body feels bad, you imagine a hum there. And then you think that hum syllable pulls in all of the sickness that's in your body. And so the sickness becomes inseparable from the hum. And then as you expel your stale air with the sound of hum, you think that hum directly shoots out of your body, taking the sickness with it. And you don't have to imagine it going out your nostrils or your mouth or anything. It just goes directly right out. So if your hand is hurting, it goes right out of your hand, like that.
Don't cut.
And you imagine that it goes as far as you can imagine. Now, if you've been doing the practices that have been taught in connection with this text, then you're good at imagining hums going to a great distance, so you already know how to do this. But basically, you have the sickness is drawn into the hum, which is inseparable from your breathing and your mind, and now the sickness. And then as you say hum and breathe out, the hum shoots out of your body as far as you can imagine. And then, of course, the sickness can't exist outside your body. And doing that will enable you to let go of the thought, I'm sick. I mean, Jamgon Lodro Thaye says, and let go of the thought, I'm sick. But actually doing this will, you can't have two thoughts at once. You can flick back and forth, but you can't actually think two things at once. So when you're following that, when that hum that's shot off like a cannonball out of a cannon, you naturally let go of the thought, I'm sick, and then simply relax. Now, in his, Lama went on several forays during his explanation of this. So I'll go through them now briefly. The first one was when he was talking about the divination and ceremonies. It's interesting that some teachers, even within Dzogchen traditions, such as Karma Chame, are in many cases primarily known by non-practitioners for the practically infinite number of such ceremonies that they composed. And if you look at the collected works of Karma Chame, you'll see so many of these particular types of ceremonies, kolto, that there are sub-collections just drawn from parts of his collected works that are themselves called 100,000 toe ceremonies. And so he composed endless numbers of these. So the point of this is that it's not that we reject these means, but it's that if someone has realization, they are not dependent on magic and divination. It's not that there's something wrong with that. It's just that they're not dependent on it. The other thing that Lama talked about was, we have this idea of repelling. And we engage in ceremonies, right? We convene, we get together, we do repelling ceremonies and so on. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to also look at the whole idea of repelling. The idea that there's yucky things we want to repel. And because there is dualism contained within that concept. So we need to, while we engage in those practices, we need to also question their correspondence to ultimate reality. And he told, in this connection, he told a story about the master of Drukpa who went to Shasa Yimalagime. He said he went to a monastery of another tradition that was looking for somebody to perform a powerful repelling ceremony. And he said that basically when he examined the circumstances of the monastery and their need for repelling ceremony and so on, he said the only thing that repelling also means to expel or banish, right? So he said the only thing that I've found in this monastery that requires expulsion is all its monks. You guys, you should all be banished, expelled. That's the only thing that needs to be expelled. Well,
that's true.
Yeah.
You talk all true.
Yeah.
We never upset. That's true. True talking upset, you are stupid.
Yeah.
He talked the true talk. He's really Mahasiddha. He knows true nature. That's true. You all have Kailashas. You guys need, the Dormas need point to you guys. That's true, of course. We need to clean, right? You do clean this, same like this coming in there. Jamgon Lodro Thaye says he didn't talk about that naked, but talking same. Yeah, 그런 게 마지막 희망만 보다 녀몽고 접잖아. 녀몽고 접서 나성고 설자고. 또 언제 탐지 단전게 돌아 단전 자와 주제로. 자 녀몽고도 첨스게 동원고도 냄새와로. 또 회사 대리, 또가 회사 대리.
So the way to put this, Jamgon Lodro Thaye doesn't point this out directly in this section, but the way to understand the relationship between all these ceremonies of repelling and whatnot, and this point of view that we don't need, that there's nothing to repel, the meeting point where these two come together is that what we are repelling is our idea that we need to repel something. Our target for what we seek to banish, what we seek to liberate, what we seek to expel is our fixation on the self. That's our only true target. So the correct way to engage in such ceremonies, Lama said, is to focus them not on external mishaps or external situations or environmental problems in the environment, but to focus them on our self-fixation, because that's the one thing that we can get rid of. It's also the one thing we need to get rid of. Well,
바로 dorje drachu korwa tingdo zore pe mainstream or na so pioneer draden drachi ja zone na da drawa drat suro zone drachu ja go nge drachu pe ne ku drachu baro dorje ke song de korwa tingdo na 이hin가의 마크는 자와 독선 더더로죠. 독선이 대 더더로고는 마 파자서 마 총거 철자고 조금에 자주 파는 피상비도 초라 단전 요리 따려. 단전 나도 자 세야 단전 효 잡아요. 근데 자와 이hin가의 마 자와 독선 더더로죠. 총거 철자고 바로도 제가 자주 팔았던 거.
So, for example, there is a liturgy composed by Padmasambhava Dorje for use with such repelling ceremonies. That's called, it's a type of liturgy that's called fixing your enemies or amelioration of enemies, which if you think about it, sounds like, I'm going to fix you. But what is the enemy being fixed? The name of the liturgy is turning samsara upside down. Or you could say repelling samsara from its depths, but it really means turning it on its head. And what are you turning on its head? The whole notion that the problems come from out there. If you think of something to be attacked, it's your own self-fixation. Something to throw a terma at, you should throw the terma at yourself.